State Representative Adam Hattersley, who is challenging Congressman Ross Spano. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's start with money. We are looking at a $22 trillion national debt. We're looking at deficits in excess of $1 trillion year after year yet to come. Would you have voted for that budget deal that took us to this point?
You know, some of these tax cuts for large corporations, it's really not looking out for the small American businessmen and the average American. So I don't think I would have voted for that. We have to do what's better for the average citizen, not just for big political and power cronies.
You wouldn't have voted for the tax cuts. What about the budget deal earlier this year that in fact ran up those $1 trillion deficits? Were you a yes or a no?
You know, honestly, I don't know as much about that budget deal as I need to make a call on that.
You're going to have to cut somewhere or raise taxes somewhere, otherwise we are surely on a path to Greece. What programs would you cut or which taxes would you raise to get us where we need to be?
Well, I want to do what I can to avoid raising taxes. And again, I'm a small business owner myself, so I feel those things when those taxes are cut, when those taxes are raised on the average American. But going back to having the same tax structure we had on corporations would help to raise that revenue we need to get back to where we were and make sure we avoid some of these tariff issues that we're seeing to bring business back. And that would just naturally raise our tax revenue because there's more volume.
Are there any programs you would cut?
Can't really think of one at the moment. But again, once I get to Washington, I'll have much more information to look at some of those programs to see where we're able to trim it up a little bit.
You have Markey and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez promoting the Green New Deal. Would you sign on to that?
There are a lot of different things that we have to look at when it comes to green technologies. I think the Green New Deal is a little bit too far.
And where specifically does it go a little too far?
Cutting off airline travel and some of the agricultural things. We have to let businesses thrive and strike a balance with climate change and with the economics of that to make progress for everyone.
One of the big environmental concerns, as you know, in Florida is the prospect of offshore drilling off of our waters to our east and, of course, to our west in the Gulf of Mexico. What would you do if elected to Congress to stave that off?
Well, I would work with both sides of the aisle to do whatever is possible to make sure that we keep offshore drilling away from Florida. Tourism is our number one industry. Our beaches are extremely important, not just to our Florida way of life, but to our economy. And keeping offshore drilling away from Florida's waters and keeping it out of our area, I think would be extremely important.
Do you think the delegation and Florida leadership at large is as united on this issue as it has been in years past? And if the answer is no, how did it fracture and how would you bring it back together?
Based on some of the past discussions and votes, I think the Florida delegation is fairly united on this. When it comes to Florida, this is a bipartisan issue, something that we can work with everybody across the aisle on.
Do you support raising the minimum wage on a federal level?
I do. Not necessarily to $15, but we have been outpacing inflation, the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation for the past several years. For example, I believe in the late 70s, the average starting salary for a college graduate was around $35,000. It's still around $35,000, but everything costs so much more. We have to make sure our citizens are able to provide for their families without having to get 2, 3, 4 jobs.
President Obama proposed raising it to $10.10 an hour in a couple of steps. That did not prevail. Would you have signed on to that?
Especially back in 2008, 2012, taking those incremental steps, I think is a smart way to adjust, to allow the economy and to allow business to adjust to these new conditions. So 10.10 is probably not a bad place to start.
That's where you would start at 10.10. The CBO did an analysis showing that it would cost upwards of 500,000 jobs if we went in that direction. Do you buy that? And if so, to what extent should that concern us?
I actually don't buy that it would cost that many jobs. It is shown in some other states where they have raised the minimum wage that it gives the average citizen more buying power, and so they put that money back into the economy and jobs end up increasing and doing well for everyone.
Unemployment is low right now in this country, far lower than it has been in many years. The challenge for many is not the availability of jobs, it's that wages have been relatively flat, many having to work perhaps 2 jobs, not being where they want to be. What specifically could you do as a member of Congress to raise wages?
Well, reinvesting in not just green technologies, as I mentioned, but in infrastructure and bringing those projects back to inject that money into people's pockets with high-paying jobs, not necessarily college, jobs that require a college degree, but any kind of vocational education to get people out without debt, to be ready to earn money straight off the bat are great ways we can go about doing that.
You believe in man-made climate change, do you not?
I do.
Which entities or companies in Florida do you think are most responsible for it, and how should they be held responsible?
Wow, that's a great question. Just our overall culture is partly responsible. I'm an engineer by degree, so I look at numbers and I look at facts when I make these decisions, and I haven't seen numbers or facts on what certain entities are polluting, so I can't answer that without looking at that information. But just by being an engineer and looking at information, that does tell me that man-made climate change is real. I mean, I'm a veteran as well, and even the Pentagon says that climate change is the #1 threat to our national security in the next 50 years.
Do you support what Congress has previously defined as a ban on assault weapons?
Assault weapons it's a tricky definition. Now, I am a gun owner myself. I do support safe and responsible gun ownership. But I also did a year in Iraq with an Army unit carrying 2 firearms a day, every day for a year. I've seen what those weapons of war are made to do. Not just Floridians, but Americans are crying out for some smart gun reform, and I'm definitely open to listening to those cries.
All firearms, of course, assault by nature. That's why they're made. It is Joe Biden who played a leading role in defining Congress's definition years ago of what an assault weapon is. By that definition, would you support that kind of a ban being reinstated today?
Well, it showed great effect when that ban came in effect. I believe it was 1994, and mass shootings have shown to increase since that sunset. So re-looking at those numbers and that definition would also be a great way to start. But even some more common sense things that the vast majority of Americans want, universal background checks, for example. It's not going to stop any legal person from getting a firearm, but it could go a long way to stopping the wrong people from getting a firearm.
State Representative Adam Hattersley, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.